Prop 8 opponents are gearing up to make their voices heard throughout the state. Both houses of the state legislature passed resolutions Monday to overturn California's same-sex marriage ban just days before the issue goes to the state Supreme Court. Yesterday's resolutions do not require action by the governor. Instead, it expresses the intent of the legislature to support arguments against Prop 8. The lawsuits argue that Prop 8, which was passed in November with 52% of voter approval, was enacted improperly and is unconstitutional because it singles out a minority group for discrimination.
To do this all again is the height of arrogance. It says, look, folks, you voted, you exercised your franchise, but you really don't know what you want. The people are wise. The people are sovereign. They know what they want. They know innately what is right and what is wrong and what kind of world they want for their children. So the people have spoken.
We all want equality. We all want the same rights, and it's wrong for one group of people to have certain rights and then another group doesn't, and it's un-American-like.
Prop 8 opponents will be holding rallies starting tomorrow in Delano at the south end of Cecil Avenue Park at 4 p.m. Then on Thursday, demonstrators will be at several locations throughout Bakersfield starting at 5 o'clock at the corners of Coffee and Rosedale, Stockdale Highway and New Stein, and Mount Vernon and Malview Road. Well, today, the state Supreme Court heard arguments for 3 hours over Proposition 8, which banned gay marriage in California. Protests for and against the ban have been happening all across the state. ABC 23's Chris Van Horn joins us now live from one of those protests right here in Bakersfield with a wrap of today's proceedings. Chris?
Yeah, Jackie, the state Supreme Court in San Francisco for about 3 hours this morning heard arguments from all sides regarding Proposition 8, which passed in November with 52% of the vote. The judges are taking a look at really 3 issues. First of all, whether Proposition 8 is constitutional and whether that means that the ban of same-sex marriage will be upheld. And then if it is ruled that it is constitutional, they'll also decide whether the 14,000 marriages that occurred after gay marriage became legal in the state will indeed still be legal. And you can kind of infer a lot from what the judges were saying. One judge, the Chief Justice Ron George, he was in favor of gay marriage last summer, but he agreed that the judge's power is very limited when it comes to overriding the will of voters. That's what he said this morning. Now, outside the courthouse in San Francisco, thousands were protesting, and this evening, dozens of people across Bakersfield and across the country are continuing to protest. We're here in the Northwest, and we're joined right now by Juan Cerda of the Bakersfield LGBTQ. You are the Director of Advocacy. What did you take from this morning's Supreme Court hearing?
Right now, we're cautiously optimistic that the Supreme Court will overturn Prop 8. It's wrong for what the passage of Prop 8, and we're very optimistic that it will be overturned.
There's several protests going on throughout town. This is just one of them. What do you hope you get out of these protests to the folks here in Kern County?
Again, we want to be visible. We want to make sure that people understand with the passage of Prop 8, it took away rights. It took away people's right to marry. It's also affecting people who were married. 18,000 couples were married last year, and with the passage of Prop 8, those marriages are on the line.
And were you guys planning any more protests beyond just today? Obviously, today was a significant day.
We're going to be looking very closely at what the Supreme Court will be doing again, but we're very optimistic that they will overturn Prop 8.
All right, Juan, thanks very much for your time. Now, the judges have 90 days to make an official ruling after hearing the oral arguments in San Francisco this morning. Reporting live from the Northwest, I'm Chris Van Horn, ABC 23. And from San Francisco to Bakersfield, thousands of people across the state protest Proposition 8 as the Supreme Court hears arguments. We'll have a live report coming up as ABC 23 News at 6 starts right now.
Covering Kern County, this is ABC 23 News at 6.
The state Supreme Court has heard arguments today over Proposition 8, while thousands protest all across the state. Good evening. I'm Jackie Parks.
And I am Todd Carley. There are several protests taking place across Bakersfield right now, and ABC 23's Chris Van Horn is live out at the promenade at the site of the protest with the hearings in San Francisco today and that protest in the Northwest. Chris?
Todd, the state Supreme Court heard about 3 hours of testimony from all sides for and against Proposition 8 up in San Francisco, just as thousands of people outside hit the streets of San Francisco protesting, and protests are happening across the state and right here in Bakersfield. Now, inside the Supreme Court chambers in this Bay Area, the judges seem to indicate that they may not have the authority to overturn the will of the voters in the case of Proposition 8. The court is actually hearing 3 arguments on 3 points: whether Prop 8 is invalid because it constitutes a revision rather than an amendment to the state constitution, or whether Proposition 8 violates the separation of powers doctrine. And then if Prop 8 is constitutional, the judges will decide whether the 18,000 marriages of same-sex couples performed in the 4.5 months before it passed, when the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage was legal, are legitimate. Now, that happened this morning. This afternoon, about 5 o'clock, is when the protest here in the Northwest started. And earlier this evening, we spoke to a representative of the Bakersfield LGBTQ who talked about why these protests are important.
And we want to be visible. We want to make sure that people are aware that this affected a lot of people. It affected people who were married last year. Over 18,000 couples were married last year. And if the Supreme Court does uphold Prop 8, those marriages are in question. And then it's also for people who want to get married in the future, won't be able to marry the person that they love.
Now, this protest got started a little bit before 5 o'clock, still going strong at this hour. There are also protests at a corner that's kind of became infamous during the campaign for Proposition 8 at California and Stockdale Highway in New Stein there, as that's one of the other protest sites here this afternoon. Coming back out live, the protest is ongoing. A lot of horns being honked at here as people show their support for and against Proposition 8. Just as the Supreme Court heard arguments today, they'll make their decision within the next 90 days. Reporting live from the Northwest, I'm Chris Van Horn, ABC 23. The state Supreme Court heard 3 hours of arguments from both sides regarding 3 lawsuits over Proposition 8 this morning, while thousands of people were outside protesting. The justices are weighing whether voters' decision to ban same-sex marriage was a denial of fundamental rights or is within the people's rights to amend the Constitution. Chief Justice Ron George, who voted in favor of gay marriage last summer, agreed that the judge's power is very limited in overriding the will of voters. That's what he said during the hearing. Outside the courthouse, thousands were protesting, and this evening, dozens of people were protesting in numerous spots across Bakersfield.
And we want to be visible. We want to make sure that people are aware that this affected a lot of people. It affected people who were married last year. Over 18,000 couples were married last year. And if the Supreme Court does uphold Prop 8, those marriages are in question. And then it's also for people who want to get married in the future, won't be able to marry the person that they love.
The Supreme Court has 90 days from today to rule on Prop 8's validity and whether 18,000 same-sex marriages that took place over last summer are legal.